In 2025, General Motors was the #1 selling automaker in America, nearly 2.9 million vehicles, stock at an all-time high, Wall Street throwing confetti. So why did their net income drop 55% in the same year? Why did they write off almost $8 billion? Why are nearly 600,000 of their best-selling trucks under federal investigation for engines that just quit? And why did the government have to step in and ban them from spying on their own customers? Here's what General Motors doesn't want you to connect. Each of those things is a symptom of the same disease, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that disease is, and why it should matter to anyone who owns or is thinking about buying a GM vehicle. Let's start with the part nobody's talking about. Revenue at General Motors hit $185 billion in 2025, which sounds like a company running at full speed. But revenue only tells you how much money came through the door, not how much leaked back out. Net income, the money General Motors actually kept, landed at $2.7 billion, down from $6 billion the year before, a $3.3 billion collapse in 12 months. And that opens up a question worth sitting with for a second, because if General Motors is outselling every automaker in America, where exactly is the money going? The answer runs through 5 separate disasters all unfolding at the same time, and the first one is the most expensive. Mary Barra, General Motors' CEO, called electric vehicles the company's North Star and the end game. General Motors built dedicated battery factories, launched a platform called Ultium, and rolled out electric versions of the Silverado, Sierra, Hummer, Escalade, Equinox, and Blazer, positioning the entire company as the automaker that would dethrone Tesla. That bet produced $7.9 billion in EV-related charges in 2025 alone. About $6 billion of that landed in a single quarter, Q4 2025, turning the final 3 months of the year into a net loss of roughly $3.3 billion. The breakdown on that $6 billion hit was $1.8 billion in non-cash write-downs and $4.2 billion in supplier settlements, impairments, and contract cancellation fees. Another $1.1 billion in EV charges followed in the first quarter of 2026, which means $9 billion evaporated in about 6 months, cleaning up a strategy that was supposed to define the next chapter of the company. Now here is where things get strange, because General Motors actually moved a lot of electric vehicles. They finished as the #2 EV seller in the country behind Tesla, with sales up 48% to about 169,800 units, and the Chevy Equinox EV became the best-selling non-Tesla electric vehicle in America, while Cadillac led the domestic luxury EV segment. Market share in the EV space climbed from 8.8% to 13.2%. None of that mattered because General Motors lost money on every single one of those vehicles. Senior automotive analyst James Picariello at BNP Paribas Exane estimated that General Motors burned through roughly $2.5 billion on the 189,000 electric vehicles it built and sold in 2024, which works out to about $13,200 lost per vehicle. General Motors announced that their EV portfolio had become variable profit positive in late 2024. But Morningstar analyst David Whiston pushed back on that framing, saying General Motors' EV business still loses money as they don't have the volume yet to recoup all the costs. And the volume problem accelerated in the wrong direction. When the $7,500 federal EV tax credit expired at the end of September 2025, it pulled demand forward, meaning the buyers who were on the fence rushed in early. Fourth quarter EV sales then cratered 43% year over year, dropping to just 25,219 units, and the customers who might have shown up next simply never came. General Motors responded with a full-scale retreat. Battery plants in Warren, Ohio and Spring Hill, Tennessee went idle. Roughly 3,400 workers across EV and battery operations lost their jobs, with 1,200 at Factory Zero in Detroit placed on indefinite layoff and over 550 at the Ultium plant in Warren facing the same. Ohio battery workers were told they would return by June of 2026, and then that date slid to August. October 2025 brought the death of BrightDrop, General Motors' electric delivery van that had managed just 1,529 sales in all of 2024 and a dismal 274 in the first quarter of 2025. That same month, General Motors dropped the Ultium brand name entirely, sold their stake in a third LG battery plant in Lansing, and converted the Orion assembly facility back to gas-powered truck production. Over at Factory Zero, the line building the Silverado EV, Sierra EV, Hummer EV, and Escalade IQ was cut down to a single shift. Barra's own words captured the reversal better than any analyst could. We were headed to be 50% EVs from a regulatory perspective by 2030. Now, without the consumer tax credit, we are on a different path. A different path is one way to frame an $8 billion U-turn, and that was only the first disaster, because the second one burned through even more cash and delivered even less. More than $10 billion flowed into Cruise, General Motors' robotaxi division, over the years. Autonomous vehicles picking up passengers with no driver behind the wheel, generating revenue around the clock. That was the pitch. And then in October of 2023, a Cruise robotaxi in San Francisco struck a pedestrian and dragged them, which triggered California to revoke their permits and set off a chain of investigations. General Motors shut Cruise down entirely in December 2024, and roughly 2,300 employees found themselves out of work. Cruise founder Kyle Vogt did not soften his reaction when he posted publicly, "In case it was unclear before, it is clear now. General Motors are a bunch of dummies." Whatever technology remained got folded into General Motors' in-house driver assistance systems, and that was the end of it. $10 billion spent, nothing that drives itself to show for it. Between the EV charges and Cruise, the combined damage runs close to $18 billion. But what should unsettle General Motors owners even more is that the problems are not limited to future bets that went sideways. The vehicles rolling off General Motors assembly lines right now have their own serious issues. April of 2025 brought a recall covering 597,630 trucks and SUVs in the United States, 721,000 worldwide, for connecting rod and crankshaft defects that NHTSA documents describe as conditions that can lead to engine damage and engine failure. Not a software bug, not a faulty sensor. The actual engine can seize and fail. Affected models span the 2021 through 2024 Cadillac Escalade, Chevy Silverado 1500, Suburban, Tahoe, GMC Sierra 1500, Yukon, and Yukon XL, which are not fringe products but the exact vehicles that fund everything else General Motors does, the trucks and SUVs that keep this company profitable. NHTSA first opened a probe in January 2025, covering roughly 877,000 to 887,000 vehicles, then escalated it to a full engineering analysis by October 2025. What happened next made things worse, because on January 16th of 2026, NHTSA reopened a recall query after 36 owners reported that the recall fix had not actually worked and their engines were still failing after the repair. Owners brought those trucks into the dealer, had the work done, drove away, and the engines broke again. Across the full year, General Motors issued 27 separate recalls affecting about 998,260 vehicles. Consumer Reports' 2026 Auto Brand Report Card placed GMC near the bottom at 23rd, Cadillac at 18th, and Chevrolet at 17th. Ultium-based EVs like the Lyriq, Blazer EV, and Optic scored well below average reliability alongside the redesigned Equinox, Terrain, and Acadia, and several General Motors models landed on Consumer Reports' outright avoid list. Among them, the 2025 Colorado, Equinox, Acadia, Canyon, Terrain, the 2025 Cadillac XT5, and the 2024 Blazer EV. Electric vehicles bleeding money, the robotaxi operation dead, and now the engines in General Motors' most profitable trucks under federal scrutiny. But we still have not arrived at the part that seems to anger General Motors owners the most, and this next piece is going to hit differently. Two decisions came out of General Motors' executive offices that feel less like business strategy and more like a message to loyal customers that their preferences do not matter. General Motors started pulling Apple CarPlay and Android Auto out of their EVs in 2023, and then in October of 2025 confirmed the removal would extend to every future vehicle across every brand, gas and electric alike, beginning with the 2028 Cadillac Escalade IQ. What replaces it is General Motors' Google-based infotainment system, which comes bundled with mandatory data plans and subscriptions. 88% of respondents in a GM Authority poll called the lack of CarPlay a dealbreaker, and McKinsey research tracked closely with that number, finding that 85% of car buyers consider CarPlay a must-have, while 45% would walk away from a vehicle that does not offer it. Dealers reported losing actual sales right there on the showroom floor, and one widely covered case involved a 15-year GM customer who left and bought a Ford Mustang Mach-E specifically over the CarPlay decision. Sterling Anderson, GM's chief product officer, described the move as a very Jobsian approach when confronted with the backlash. Comparing yourself to Steve Jobs while stripping out a feature that nearly 9 out of 10 of your customers demand takes a particular brand of self-assurance. The second decision cuts deeper. General Motors and OnStar were collecting drivers' precise GPS locations and driving behavior as often as every 3 seconds, according to former FTC chair Lena Khan, and selling that data to brokers like LexisNexis and Verisk. An FTC complaint arrived in January 2025, and on January 14th of 2026, the agency finalized a 5-year ban prohibiting General Motors from sharing that data with consumer reporting agencies. California followed in May of 2026 with a $12.75 million settlement under the California Consumer Privacy Act, the largest CCPA penalty in the state's history. CalMatters reported that General Motors had generated approximately $20 million from the unlawful sale of their data between 2020 and 2024. $20 million earned from selling customer data, $12.75 million paid in fines, which left GM ahead by more than $7 million. That math does not function as a punishment, it functions as a revenue stream. One more front deserves attention. China served as GM's biggest market by volume for years, and at its peak in 2017, General Motors moved about 4.04 million vehicles there. By 2024, that figure had collapsed to roughly 1.8 million, and market share fell from over 15% in 2015 to about 6.8% as Chinese competitors like BYD and Geely, fueled by the domestic EV surge, took over the market. A $4.4 billion loss on China operations hit GM in 2024. Some recovery followed in 2025 with a modest profit of about $197 million through the first 9 months. But auto analyst Bill Russo captured the reality when he described GM as surviving, not thriving in China. Five fronts, all bleeding at once: the EV retreat, the cruise shutdown, the engine failures, the consumer betrayals, and the China decline. Any one of them alone would qualify as a rough stretch. All five stacked together form a pattern. Now the raw sales numbers demand honesty here. General Motors is not on the verge of bankruptcy. 2,853,299 vehicles sold in the United States in 2025, more than Toyota, more than Ford, more than anyone else. With sales up 5.5% and market share at 17.2%, the highest since 2015 and the fourth consecutive year of growth. Full-size pickup leadership held for the sixth straight year at roughly 960,000 Silverados and Sierras combined, the strongest showing since 2007, and full-size SUV dominance stretched to 51 consecutive years. Shares reached all-time highs. The board authorized $6 billion in buybacks and raised the dividend 20%, and the first quarter of 2026 delivered earnings that beat Wall Street estimates by 42%. General Motors guided for 2026 net income between $10.3 and $11.7 billion, roughly double what they earned in 2025. So General Motors is not vanishing tomorrow. That part is clear. What should keep every General Motors owner and shareholder up at night is something harder to fix than a bad quarter or a write-down. GM is dismantling the trust that holds the entire business together. Over $10 billion went into a robotaxi that produced nothing. Almost $8 billion evaporated on an EV strategy the company is now unwinding. Nearly 600,000 of GM's core trucks and SUVs carry a recall for engine failure, and the fix itself may not hold. A feature that 88% of customers call a dealbreaker got ripped out of future vehicles. And the company was caught tracking customer locations every 3 seconds and selling that data to the highest bidder. Bad quarters pass, and GM has survived write-downs and even a full bankruptcy before. But the real question sitting in front of every person watching this comes down to one thing. Knowing everything you just heard, would you still hand GM $60,000, $70,000, or $80,000 for a new truck? Silverados and Tahoes are still moving off dealer lots today. That much is true. But customer loyalty erodes in one direction, and GM keeps accelerating the process. Once a lifelong customer walks into a Toyota or Ford dealership for the first time, they rarely walk back. That is the real story at General Motors. Not a company going out of business, but a company systematically burning through the loyalty of the people who kept it alive for over a century. I spent weeks putting this together, connecting things that GM really doesn't want connected. And here's what I realized. They are not the only ones. Every major automaker has skeletons they're hiding from you, billion-dollar mistakes they're burying, things happening behind closed doors that would change how you see them overnight. So do me a favor, go to the comments and drop the name of the automaker you want me to investigate next. Whoever gets the most requests, that's where I'm going, and trust me, nobody is safe on this channel. I'll see you in the next one.